Hi, everybody. I'm Victoria. I'm part of the Croissant team. I'm based out of the UK, up in Peterborough, north of London. It's really lovely to have you all here today. I'm super excited to introduce Zoltan, our CEO and co-founder of Croissant. David as well. He's the founder and community builder of a chief of staff. It's great to have you both here today. Over the next 30 minutes or so, Zoltan and David will discuss how chief of staff are helping companies connect the dots between people, policy, budget, leadership alignment, that sort of thing. We'll have some time in the end for Q&A. So feel free to drop questions in the chat as they come up, and we will try to get to them at the end. The session is also being recorded, so we'll send that out to you as well at the end so you don't miss anything. And with that, Zoltan, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Victoria. David, welcome. I'm really excited to have you. You're kind of a hot commodity in the chief of staff industry. So getting you getting you on is an absolute delight. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. As Victoria said, I'm Zoltan, CEO of Croissant. If you want to learn more about Croissant, you can check out our website. But David, for those of you that don't know you, would give us an introduction.
Yeah. First, thanks for having me, Zoltan. Victoria, thanks for kicking this off as well. My name is David Nabinski. I'm here in Brooklyn. I'm the founder of A Chief of Staff. I've had three different Chief of Staff like roles. Love the role and have also been working at the intersection of community building and Chiefs of Staff as well. And yeah, excited to talk about workplace, Chiefs of Staff, events, and future of work. So thanks for having me, Zoltan.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think just to, before we jump into the meaty, greedy things, just to level set a little bit, the chief of staff is sort of a relatively kind of new role that's emerging. So just tell us a little bit about like, what is a chief of staff? And, for those that may be joining and looking at like, maybe I need a chief of staff, like walk us through a little bit about that. Like what is it? Who is it? What's the ideal candidate? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple different definitions. Just like the role is different in a lot of different places. No two chiefs of staff roles are the same, and I think the definition of a chief of staff kind of varies, but the way that I think about it is it's amplifying an executive. So the chief of staff supports either a CEO, a founder on really that person's primary objectives. There's a lot of other roles at companies kind of support the team or the organization, while a chief of staff is all about amplifying Zoltan as an example. Zoltan's working on a lot of different things across the company. And instead of having KPIs on sales or building a great product only, a chief of staff is focused on Zoltan, and Zoltan's running a lot of different directions throughout the day, week, etc. And the chief of staff is like, okay, here's the main priority, and here's what Zoltan's really focused on, or how do I amplify Zoltan's impact? So that's what the chief of staff is focused on. The role kind of like first started in the public sector, and then has kind of blossomed and grown in the private sector. And um, it I think has really been popular amongst tech companies as a way to, yeah, amplify this leaders, or which sometimes we call principal, objectives and initiatives. And I think sometimes people have been a chief of staff but didn't know they were a chief of staff. My first chief of staff like experience started in 2014, and my official title was head of growth. But
Hmm.
So, but as I've come to learn over the years, that was definitely more like a chief of staff where I supported um, one of the co-founders who was the COO
Mhm.
at the time, and really it was like what we were focused on was like, or what he was focused on was like that was my day. And
Yeah.
then as the company grew, I then like would help out with like I'd oversee the sales team, or I would help with like employee onboarding and like building systems and processes, and just like kind of going from like 0 to 1, kind of like kickstarting these projects, and then we'd bring in specialists to oversee these things. But yeah, I really was like focused on what the COO, one of the co-founders, was really thinking about, and that was like my main focus was like,
Yeah.
how do I make his day better, his week better? Obviously, like he's focused on growing the company as well, but like I was really focused on, expanding his impact.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's interesting because when you said that, it really resonated with me because we're Croissant is we've been around for a while, but we're still very much a startup. And the success of any company is really like how effectively and efficiently can you run like multiple sort of growth programs at the same time. So when you were like, yeah, I was doing sales, doing this, and overseeing this, it's like it's interesting because that's how it works, right? Is like I operate very similarly as a founder, where it's like, okay, we got to set up a sales process. I'm gonna do it until here, and then I'm gonna get a specialist to come in and bring it. So that really resonated with me. So it's like a chief of staff is almost kind of like this specialist generalist that can get it to a certain point, make sure it works, and hit the right KPIs, and then essentially just bring in the person who's gonna kind of take it to the next level. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think what's interesting about obviously I'm biased because it's my personal experience, but I think what's interesting about my experience was this I think sometimes is a common story within chief of staff roles is like
Mhm.
it first started off as like me chatting with my friend. Like we just were like
Mm.
jamming on the company. We like, and he was like, "Hey, I'm really in early stages of this thing. Like, here's who we're talking to right now as potential customers. Like, I really think this could be a potential customer. Like, I've got this meeting coming up next week." And like, he wanted someone just to like nerd out with, and I was had more of like a corporate role at the time, and like his kind of entrepreneurial spirit and kind of this like ups and downs and like hope and optimism was like really fueling for me, and I had
Mhm.
a little bit more um kind of like rigor and structure. I was like, wait, what's this meeting you have coming up? Like, what do they want? And like, he's like, I don't know. Like, I think they're interested in this. And I'm like, why are they interested? He's like, I don't know. Like, that's how it is in the startups. You just kind of like talk to
Yeah.
people and then you kind of see what resonates and like you listen to their problems. And anyways, long story short, like, um, eventually the company was like thinking about moving to a new vertical, and that was a vertical that I had a lot more experience in. And he's like, we're kind of like starting to talk to these kind of people.
Yeah.
Like like it seems like some of those customers. And I actually was working at a company at the time that was like a pretty well-known player in that space. And then he's like, wait, do you think like that company would be interested? And I'm like, I don't know. Are you ready? Like, a couple of months
Is the
ago we were
product
talking.
ready?
Yeah,
Yeah.
a couple of months ago we were talking, and you were like, "I'm not sure where this company's
Yeah.
going." And I was like, "Okay, if you're ready, or when you're ready, like, I'm happy to try to find an internal champion." Like, I wasn't entirely sure
Mhm.
at that time. Not a lot of companies were having like tech initiatives or
Yeah.
head of startups or um, this was in 2014, 2013. Like
Yeah.
the idea of like working with tech startups and innovation and was kind of a newer concept then. So anyways, I end up finding an internal champion. Um, and this person was like, "Oh, this is so cool. You know this company, you know this product." And I was like, yeah. He's like, bring this person in ASAP. I want to talk to this. And I was like, well, and so I called my friend and I was like, I found someone who is like interested. And then, anyways, long story short, like the company that I eventually started working for, the startup as the chief of staff, um, they then partnered with the company that I was working with before. And like, then my friend was kind of like, okay, it seems like this vertical. And like I'm super grateful for you for like making this introduction. This was like a very like impactful pilot for us, and it seems like there's a lot of potential now with this customer base. Like, do you want to work with us, or like could we do something in a little bit more official
Yeah.
capacity? And then one thing led to another. Then I was like a contractor, and then it became full time, and then we decided on head of growth, and like
Yeah.
that was a title that was I was in San Francisco at the time. That was a title that was like becoming more popular as well, similar to the chief of staff. And but that kind of it just started as like us talking about kind of his startup and how could I
Yeah.
support him as a friend. And then like actually I think Zoltan, you tell me, but if you can help a founder grow a business and their business, like you'll listen to when
100% hired it.
you're not gonna if a friend calls you and says, "Hey, I've got a customer. Can you respond to this email or can you sign this paper?" You're probably gonna say yes to that. So I think like
Yeah.
looking back on it, and talking to so many different chiefs of staff and stuff like that, it's like who are the people that like who already
Yeah.
which products and services, what people do you
Mhm.
think are great business builders, and like if there's a way to add value and in meaningful ways, like those business owners will listen to you and they would love that, like people want to work with people that they know, like, and trust. And so this kind of organic approach of like how I became a chief of staff for this company, I think is I've seen it kind of play out in my career later on as well. But like I think a lot of times people ask me to like how to get a chief of staff role, and I'm like, especially these days, it's like instead of applying online, like who's the friend that that is building a company, or like what's a space and a product that well that like you could talk to a founder and say like, hey, I've been a customer of your product for years. I know someone that you should talk to, or here's this way that I think you should improve it. That would have like a big impact to your business. Like I think that's
Yeah.
um, a place to start.
That's a good point, and I'm a little biased here because we talk to a lot of chief of staffs, and they kind of come to us and they're like, hey, I need to improve our culture. We're fully remote. I need to do something with my remote people to give them an in-office experience. So I'm biased because my impression is, as you say, chief of staff, and I'm like, oh, HR, culture, right?
Mm,
Especially like especially like those companies that are 100, 200, maybe even up to 300 is like, for me, the impression is like, oh, chief of staff is like HR, but it doesn't sound like it is. I mean, there is a cultural element, right? But it sounds like they're a lot more than that. But that's like what we experience is like we get a lot of the chief of staff when they're coming to us, trying to improve that cultural aspect. Yeah.
yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and what do you say to them?
Well, well, come on in. But it sounds like I guess the point is like it sounds like the chief of staff role is so much more than that, right? It's like it's sort of like what the CEO needs at that exact time, right? And like sometimes that could be culture, sometimes it's like, hey, go launch a new market, or whatever else that may be. I mean, I guess the catalyst for when chief of staff come to us is like, hey, we need to, you know a remote culture. Maybe some employees are feeling burnt out, or they need a place to get out. I have a 1-year-old, so I like to get out of the office. So like that cultural catalyst is probably like the CEO mandate where we really hear like when they hear that and then they go out and find a solution like ours. So I just always had this. You kind of like broke the impression because I always had this impression that like, oh, chief of staff. Well, yeah, they're just like HR people, but in disguise, and they do a lot more too. So.
Well, I think one thing that like I guess I'll just say something that I'm hearing from you is like oftentimes the chief of staff is very thoughtful and empathetic and is really good with people. And so the idea that like they're working on the company culture and internal community building and working cross-functionally and building relationships with a lot of different people, and thinking about the company's internal community and the people that are working there, I think like that um you know seems obvious and natural because many chiefs of staff, because they work so closely with a principal and a CEO, like for the most part, like they're just naturally very a high EQ,
Yeah.
and are like great with people. So the idea that like, culture being a part of what they're working on, like is makes a lot of sense, and it does happen a lot. There's no two chiefs of staff roles are the same, so there's sometimes that are, ones that have more of like an entrepreneurial bent, and
Yeah.
they join the role because they want to learn from a founder like Zoltan on how to build a business, and so. Like one time I interviewed for a chief of staff role, I think it was like 2018. And I was talking to the person and he's like, cool, like this is an 18-month stint. And, at the end of this 18 months, like we're going to incubate a business together. And then at the end of the 18 months, like you're then going to run that business. And
Hmm.
that's what
Interesting.
that principal at the time wanted.
Hmm.
And that was like the focus. And so that person was trying to attract a more like entrepreneurial business builder types of chief of staff. And so we would like work in collaboration and then kind of like build this business and then go take it and run with it. And, so that was the focus of what that uh, principal and leader wanted at the time. And then sometimes, there's, some, a principal wants someone to help with internal culture. Maybe
Yeah.
there's, it's a distributed company. Maybe it's a company that has gone through a lot of different M&A transactions and they have a lot of different product lines or offices all over the place and have gone through a lot of different M&A transactions and are feeling like it's disconnected. Maybe they will bring on a chief of staff that is really thoughtful and thinking about how do we bring these different offices together, these different teams, these different divisions, and from a cultural perspective, but also probably from an operational perspective of like, hey, the product department in Barcelona should be talking to the product department in New York. Why
Yeah.
isn't that happening? And how do we make that happen? So, um, yeah, that's kind of the beauty of the chief of staff role is that it's a little bit of like, and why like it's really good to talk to the person that you're going to be working with because the JD, it's missing a lot of context a lot of times. Um, and it's cool because like it can be a very unique and singular role that like
Yeah.
this chief of staff role at Croissant is different than a chief of staff role anywhere else.
Yeah.
So it's like a very specific role.
And have you seen like you talk to a lot of chief of staff. I mean, you have a whole community built around chief of staff. So, and have you seen that like with the rise of hybrid remote work, especially like post-COVID, like have you seen any creation of like new problems for culture and like how do you create those informal moments that used to happen naturally, but they might not happen anymore? Like what are some of the cultural things that you hear that are like the chief of staff starts kind of talking about, right? Like, or kind of, are there any buzzes going on, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like the hmm, what's coming to mind was, I think that there over the last couple of years there'd been increasingly, I think the chief of staff or like the remote chief of staff role like had like a little bit of a moment during the pandemic, and I think this is probably similar to um, other roles and other companies. I think like the remote chief of staff role was around for a little bit. It's becoming less popular and
Hmm.
as leaders are saying, I want to see the chief of staff 1 or 2 days a week or 3 days a week,
Mhm.
et cetera, to develop that context to really understand what is Zoltan's priority. What's that thing that Zoltan said, like, casually in between meetings that was like, hey, what would be cool would be like if we did this, but like
Yeah.
it, and then a smart chief of staff would say like a couple of months later, be like, hey, Zoltan, that thing that you just like casually mentioned? Well, like I just saw this, I was talking to a friend or I was talking to a peer, I was at an event and someone is actually like working on something like that. Or it
Mhm.
seems like at the moment it wasn't the biggest priority, but like right now there's a technological shift or operational shift. And like, I feel like we could like, really grow the business now from that like loose idea that you
Yeah.
had. So that like develop like learning about this like context and understanding is like, what are those like half-baked ideas like those that happen in like the water cooler type chats.
Yeah.
Um,
So the chief of
so
staff is really like a best friend you keep around. Sort of.
yeah, a collaborator, a partner, and I
Yeah.
think that really works. But that's the benefit of the role is like that true partnership is like very unique. And that's what happens. Like a really great chief of staff role is a partnership. It is a collaboration, and for both sides, like you as CEO can share a lot of different things to the chief of staff that you probably wouldn't share anywhere else. But you have that trusted relationship, and then vice versa. Over time, then that those kind of half-baked ideas could like the chief of staff can keep thinking about that and be like, okay, like there's probably some things that like probably don't want the entire company to know, but like you want to at least like get it off your chest. It's a loose idea. It's like a half-baked thought,
Yeah.
and then like a chief of staff, it'll just like we'll be listening to that. It'll be thinking about that randomly while they're listening to a podcast or a webinar like this, and like okay, remember that thing? Like, actually, let's and maybe someoe's listening to this and it's like, huh, I wonder if Zoltan could use a chief of staff. Like
Yeah.
like, huh, like maybe I'm listening to him. I'm really curious about Croissant, and it doesn't look like, you
But
know,
it sounds like trust has to be a pretty big thing, right? Because essentially what you're saying is like, hey, I'm the guy that you can kind of, and I say this slightly, but remove the filter a little bit, right? I mean,
yeah,
I think there are certain things you can kind of say, and there are certain things you can say about the business, and there are certain things that you might, cannot share at the time, whether it's a fundraising round or whatever. So there probably has to be like a very deep level of trust with this individual that's sort of like, like coming on and be like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna kind of like loosen the filter a little bit
yeah.
and kind of give him like, my thought process as to like how I'm thinking about that. Like, do is that a problem for chief? Like, how do you create that level of trust, like coming into the role and it's like, hey, here's a CEO where there's already this kind of like power dynamic. I'm not saying like, you're kind of intimidated by it or whatever, but like, there's obviously a power dynamic there, right? So it's like, how do you sort of create that trust where it's like, you know what, I'm going to get this person who's in charge of a company that's maybe 40 people, 50, whatever it may be, but they are in charge of the company to trust me enough to kind of remove that filter so that I can do my job to the best of my abilities?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as we were talking, like in my case, like existing relationship has been really helpful.
Yeah.
Or like a friend of a friend or referral can go a long
Yeah.
way. I think like this can also come through in the interview process. Like, I think it'd be a good idea if, particularly for this role, if a chief of staff can, you know, in addition to the case studies or the actual, like work assessments. It's just like Zoltan, I would love to spend, an afternoon with you and like co-work with you, or I'd love
Yeah.
to just like go for like a 2 hour, 3 hour walk with you and and really like spending that time to really kind of build that trust and build that context and be like, do we vibe? Like I was talking to someone
Yeah.
last night and they were talking to me about how they were interviewing for a chief of staff role and they basically said that the founder said to this person, you passed the vibe test. I'm not sure if you're going like we it still remains to be seen about how much of like if there's a work fit here, but like from a vibe perspective, like we're we're in sync here. We get along well. So yeah, I do think that like it's going both ways where I think the founder or the principal is thinking about like, is this someone that I could spend a lot of time with? Like,
Yeah.
so as it goes both ways. There's also a couple things that like it's like user manuals or how to work with me guides is another thing that
Mm.
like can help chiefs of staff and the leaders like really understand the person about like what annoys them, what ticks them off, like or and what makes them happy, what motivates them, what makes them smile. Like I know we've been talking about music and festivals and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like what is that kind of stuff that lights you up? Like I think you got to understand the person as a person more and more in this kind of like really dynamic, high trust
Yeah.
role and partnership.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting because I think sometimes the role is probably also about from our exposure to it of changing a CEO's mind. We had we had a we had a chief of staff that came to us, and she was like, well, we're fully remote, but I'm going to change the CEO's mind, and I need you to help me do that.
Mm.
you know and I'm like, I will do my best, and luckily enough, we succeeded, but we rolled out a pilot. Um, but I think like there has to be a lot of trust in this
Trust.
essence of like meritocracy, where it's like the CEO is going to be like, you know what? I'm going to shift my entire culture from remote to, we're going to kind of offer this infrastructure that's going to give people access to different workspaces, and so basically like opening up budget to do that. So I was very impressed with her, because to be honest, I wasn't sold at first, because I'm like, oh, you're gonna, she was a new chief of staff, and I'm like, all right, you're gonna come in and I was like, that's great, that's disruptive, I love it. But I think like to the point is that there had to be like a pretty strong level of trust in knowing that, like, what, this person's gonna, I'm gonna give her the lane to do it, and I'm gonna let her, take it as far as she can, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that yeah, so like that level of trust and meritocracy, like when you don't know somebody, has to, it's hard to try to create that overnight with the snap of a finger.
Yeah. But when it's there, it's magical, just like you're talking about, right? Like how many people at that organization could have the
Yeah,
context or understanding or relationship to be able to like change the CEO's mind on something that really matters
exactly.
for the company. And so
Yeah,
that's like really cool to hear how you're like, oh, I'm not sure if that's gonna work. And then it did. Like that's
yeah.
chiefs of staff can make magic like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, she was fantastic at it. Like, she put together a survey that she sent out to the employees. So she's like, "See, this is what the employees are saying." And then we ran the pilot, and she took another say survey, and she's like, "Hey, this is what the employees are saying." So I think she kind of she got the nuance of the C of like, okay, like I can convince him by doing XYZ, right? Because every CEO is different. I mean, I think, a lot of CEOs are data driven, but it's like, what would convince him, would convince me is probably very different, right? So like really understanding those nuances of like what influences an individual is probably like a huge piece of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? What would work for you? How can people change your mind, or what's a way to influence you in a way that's like win-win? Like how do you like to receive new ideas or yeah.
It's a great question. I would probably have to ask Fernanda what her impression is. I'm very like, I'm very data driven. And probably if I'm not already thinking about an idea, if I'm not already kind of like, well, maybe we should revisit this, then it probably takes multiple times, and it probably takes a little bit of, persistence and tenacity with data, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah. If it's not a problem I'm already thinking about, if it's a problem I'm already thinking about, then I'm looking for more validation, or perhaps, different types of inputs to be able to make the right decision, kind of trying to get to that 70-75% mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Data and like communicating the
Yeah.
ROI, the benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's really power. I mean, like, but, going back to her case, it's really powerful. I mean, if you have like, if you're like, hey, we have 50 employees, they all kind of say like, hey, this would be kind of a good thing because it would help me perform better or be more productive. I would probably be like, you know what? Okay, so, I get it. Working from home, isolation, like, I got a 1-year-old pterodactyl that so like I got to get out of the house. Um, okay, so I can kind of get that. So there's something about that bottoms up approach where it's, if the employees are saying something, and like bringing that information to this, like packaging that information and bringing it to the CEO, I think is powerful, because probably what people are willing to say to her in an anonymous survey would probably not say to the CEO. Like in my previous jobs, I was reporting directly to the CPO, and the CEO had a chief of staff, and the CEO was like the nicest guy ever. So the chief of staff would kind of deliver the feedback,
Yeah.
which I thought was a very interesting dynamic, because you would give a presentation, and it would be like, yeah, great, great, this was great, and then the feedback came afterwards. So I mean, what I mean by that is like, there's like almost like this communication sort of um force between, employees and perhaps, the C-suite where it's like having a chief of staff that maybe knows the employees or kind of is like more plugged into the vibes and the ebbs and flow of the organization is probably in a position to change minds.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to a chief of staff this week, and she was talking to me about just like, yeah, how much time she just spends just talking to people at the company. It's just like informally, just like trying to grab lunch, go for walks, just like
Mhm.
get a pulse as to what's going on at the company, what's a pulse is going on in different teams. Like just really, you never know where that that idea that we were talking about, like where that comes from, and it could come from, the junior product person or the
Mhm.
person who just joined in engineering. And so I think, chiefs of staff spend a lot of time trying to gather up that context and understanding of what's really like the pulse of the company. That like the CEO or the principal, as an example, like it's got a lot of other like high level strategic initiatives that try to talk to everybody at the company, but might not have the time right in that season of work. But a chief of staff that can be like just be really plugged into the pulse of the company and then be able to like surface that information when it makes sense, is definitely can be really really impactful. Yeah, so that's I think. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so tough question from, from sort of like a CEO perspective is, chief of staff sounds great. I'm sold. Um, let's get one tomorrow. But how do you measure the ROI? You know,
How do
what's the
you?
KP? What's that? Say
So
that again.
how do you, if you were to hire a chief of staff next week, what would be a no-brainer to you? What would you say? Okay, like I wasn't thinking about hiring a chief of staff, but now I am.
That's a great question. I'm not sure. We might have to do a part two on that one.
Right,
I
on
could-
that note, guys, part two TBD coming.
Part two TBD. That's right. I will have to get back to you.
Oh, thanks so much to both of you for such a lively discussion. I think we could keep going. There's so much to cover, and the chief of staff role is so nuanced and so interesting. It's been fascinating to learn more about it, and yeah, the ins and outs of it, and how complex it really is, and how different it is across different, well, from company to company, really. So we've run a little bit over, so we've got time for just a couple of questions. And I will read some out to you here. So, this person is asking about remote work and kind of so they're saying we've seen a lot of companies reverse course on remote work and face real backlash around that post COVID. From a chief of staff perspective, what does it look like to handle a big workplace policy shift in a way that doesn't blow up trust, even when the decision is unpopular?
Zoltan, you want to take that one?
That's a very loaded and great question. I mean, I think going back to the previous example that I just gave of, um, like working, like convincing the CEO and working with the information that you have and that you're able to get from the employees and surfacing that and then packaging that data. Like, I think for me, that would probably be like, the most influential. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And a question for David here. This person saying, what's a belief about workplace culture that you held early on in your career that you've since changed your mind on?
What is a workplace cultural belief that I've changed my mind on? Whew. I think what's coming to mind is that um, anybody can be the like internal cultural and community builder. It doesn't need to be, only the chief of staff or only the head of people or uh, and anybody who wants to be that internal champion or find ways to help the company connect and people internally form, have the conversations that they need to have. Like, you don't need to wait for, an executive to say, you know what, we should talk about, new workplace strategies. We should talk about how AI is affecting the company. Like, no one needs to wait for, or think that it's so and so's job. It's anybody's opportunity to step up and lead. And I think, yeah, I would love to see more of that. And that's something that I'm trying to embody more.
Yeah, I totally sorry. I totally agree with David. Like the thing is like, there are so many things that, you like from sort of like an executive perspective, there are so many things you're trying to focus on, so many things you're trying to do. Sometimes you're just kind of like in the back of your head, you're like, well, somebody just stand up and take this problem and go with it. You know, and I think like, and then pushing on like going reflecting on my employee experiences, sometimes I think like David, like 100% on point is sometimes employees are just kind of like, I don't know if I should, maybe I need to ask permission. Like my advice would be like, don't ask permission, go with it, like solve the problem and then bring it, like really be that champion because the reality is like I think you hire A players to take sort of problems or to think about problems or to solve problems for you, you know? Um, so yeah, sorry to jump in, but I totally, when David said that, a light bulb went off and I was like, yeah, that's absolutely right, you know? Yeah.
Oh,
I love it. Yeah.
fantastic.
Cool. Yeah.
It's great
That'll
to
be
hear that from both
that
sides.
that'll be our part three. We're gonna talk
Part
about that
three, that's right.
time.
It's turning into a mini series. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Right. So we've got time for one more question here. And the question is, so workplace decisions, where people work from, how offices are designed, return to office policies, all of these things have become enormous culture signals, whether organizations intend them to be or not. How has that dimension of the job changed, and how often does it land on the chief of staff to navigate?
I can start with that.
Yeah.
My sense it depends on the size of the company, and so of like how involved the chief of staff is in the real estate and workplace um, kind of like strategy or initiative. Um, but I mean, I've talked to chiefs of staff and they're like, it's my first week, and now I've got to figure out what to do with this new office. So sometimes that just becomes the new main project that a chief of staff is focused on. I think also if I don't have a lot of data on this, but I'm curious like the relationship that dynamic that a chief of staff is also involved in some of the recruiting efforts. I wonder how much then uh, that chief of staff then is a part of the real estate and workplace strategy. If like, if a chief of staff has a real strong pulse as to like, hey, we're hiring 5 engineering people or we're about to hire 2 product people and like, this is either going fast or it's going slow and like really just having a pulse as to like headcount, so to speak. And also talking to people, going back to what we were talking about before, like if a chief of staff is involved in the recruiting process and is really talking to people like Zoltan and Zoltan saying like, I want to join, but I want to join if we have, an office or we have multiple offices or we have a Croissant membership or, like just understanding like what gets people to join a company and like what are those kind of conversations. I think then like probably those chiefs of staff there, then I have a good pulse as to like the office dynamic and it's probably then taking that information and bringing to the principal and saying like, hey, we're hiring like as a heads up this week we actually signed 5 offer letters and interestingly like people are excited for the company and to do work but like a lot of them are talking about how they want to be in person more or they want to have flexibility or so I think like that's another way if a chief of staff is involved in the recruiting process and it works on that as like one of the other like main projects that they're working on they probably have a good pulse as to what's happening for like the office and workplace strategies.
Cool, fantastic. Thank you. Um, well, A huge thank you to you both. That has been a great conversation. Thanks for answering the questions as well. We'll really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the week, and we will speak soon. Thank you very much, Zoltan and David.
Thanks, David.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. This was great.
Take care. Bye.